Richard and Monica had chemistry, no doubt. Frank and Alice couldn't keep their hands off each other, but both couples shared one thing: massive age gaps. In this video, we're asking, were these relationships romantic or just plain creepy? Let's start with Monica and Richard. Normally, people would raise their brows if a lady developed a crush on someone her dad's age. The age gap here is at least 20 years. But the real issue with age gaps isn't just the number, it's the imbalance. The younger partner is often still naive and figuring life out, while the older partner is already established and experienced. In this case, Richard has already done it all. He's been married, raised kids, built a successful medical practice, and is basically enjoying the later stage of his life. Monica, on the other hand, is just starting hers. She's at the beginning of her career, dreaming about marriage and babies, the very things Richard has already had and moved past. But we also have to realize that while all this context is valid, Richard wasn't out there chasing Monica, a girl he'd known since she was a baby. That would have been super weird. Instead, they just bumped into each other later in life. He was her eye doctor, they hadn't seen each other in years, and the attraction sparked as adults. It plays into a familiar dynamic: older men attracted to younger women intrigued by older men, peers envious when one of their friends starts dating someone much younger, and older women rolling their eyes at the whole thing. What makes it hilarious in Friends, though, is the twist. The 20-something woman Richard is sneaking around with turns out to be their own daughter. Now, if Monica and Richard crossed a line, Alice and Frank bulldozed right through it. Their relationship was all shades of wrong from the very first minute. Frank was just 17, a kid, not the sharpest tool in the box, who falls in love with his home economics teacher, a woman in her 40s. She's decades older, in a position of power, and what follows is inappropriate, abusive, and crosses way too many lines. And yet, the show plays it off as quirky and even romantic. On one hand, Frank is clearly not mature enough to know what he wants, or even understand the weight of what he's signing up for. On the other hand, Alice knows exactly what she wants and what she's getting into. That imbalance is a huge injustice to Frank. The men in the series who are actually mature enough to know what they want and to understand the weight of their choices are Ross, Chandler, and, well, Joey. So Phoebe pleads with Ross and Joey to have a serious, grown-up, man-to-man talk with Frank to help him realize he's making a bad decision and still has his whole life ahead of him. They try. They tell him about all the young women he hasn't met yet, all the experiences he hasn't had, all the things he could still try. But then Frank flips it on them. He asks, "Isn't the whole point of all that adventure to eventually find your person?" They agree. Then he tells them he's already found his person. So what's the point of waiting? A truly grown-up group of adults would have acknowledged Frank's point. Yes, it feels like you've found your person, but also remind him that he's too young to really grasp the consequences. At 17, with no job, no degree, and no stability, he has no business talking about marriage or bringing kids into the world, especially with someone decades older. But no, the show plays it off as romantic, even something Ross and Joey almost envy. So in the show's view, it's like we're supposed to take a step back and realize that, as awkward, weird, and wildly inappropriate as this seems, Frank and Alice actually want the same things. They're ridiculously attracted to each other, the kind of attraction that ignores public places, and they genuinely want to spend their lives together, have babies, and be a family. Which makes it a really tough thing for anyone around them to even try to stop. And that's where we see the real difference between Monica and Richard versus Frank and Alice. The show asks us to accept both couples as being in love despite their inappropriate backstories. But while Frank and Alice are on the same page, they both want marriage, babies, and a family. Monica and Richard are not. So in the end, it isn't just the age gaps that separate these couples. It's the mismatch of life goals. That's what dooms Monica and Richard, and ironically, what makes Frank and Alice work in the world of Friends. Hey, before we go, double standard alert. Friends plays Frank and Alice as quirky, even funny in their weirdness. But imagine if the roles were reversed. if Frank were a 17-year-old girl dating her 40-something male teacher. Suddenly, it's not quirky, it's a crime. We'd be calling the police, because it's not funny. It's deeply uncomfortable, predatory, and abusive. That's the real issue with how the show frames it. The gender dynamic softens what would otherwise be seen for exactly what it is: exploitative and wrong. So in the end, that's the big question. Were these couples actually cute, or just plain creepy? Let me know what side you're on in the comments.